I have a friend who's shy, never goes to parties no matter how bad she wants to. She's actually scared of being out at a mall or a beach. She's one of the smartest people I know, but hates being singled out in class by the teacher, even for praise. The idea of going to college next year is something that terrifies her so much that she's seeing a therapist for it. And it turns out she's not shy at all. She has social anxiety. Social anxiety is just one of the many phobias that the much accomplished Dr. Mina Dilip will be taking us through today. Dr. Dilip is a certified play therapist, a consultant psychologist for the British High Commission in Chennai. She specializes in a unique form of play therapy designed for children. She also works with parents and a lot of adolescents. And we have a busy morning for her because we have a lot of questions today in breadth and depth from parents who want to know why their kids want to be in the room or on their phone all the time, as well as from teenagers who want to understand their social anxiety better. I'm Ms. Dilip. Welcome to TeenWork. So good to have you here.
Thanks, Aryan. That was a lovely introduction. So go for it. Start your question. Shoot away.
Let's start with the generic one. Social skills are not just a success tool, but a survival tool these days. So how do you get your teenager who's not interested in socializing to work on their social skills?
So you're very right when you say that social skills are a survival tool, and it's not just nowadays. It's always been that way.
Evolutionary.
Absolutely. And man is a social animal, and we wouldn't survive as a species if we couldn't interact with others, because we have to operate in groups, and our ancestors were in herds for a reason, for protection. So through generations, we've evolved into these social beings, and therefore social skills are really, really important for our survival as a species. Having said that, in modern times, it has become a huge challenge, given how we've been away for such a long time, especially in the post-pandemic era. This has become one of the biggest talked about subjects where people are struggling to re-engage. And this is particularly true for teens. And it's not just now, but from time immemorial. I think for the last several decades, I've been hearing this, that teenagers find it particularly difficult to connect socially, to have a social group, to be with their peers. And it's a very real challenge. And their fears are valid, because I'm sure you're also aware that children and adolescents can be really cruel. So there's a lot of teasing and bullying and hazing that goes on in that age group. It just makes it so much harder for them to be out there, put themselves out there, make themselves vulnerable and exposed, right? So it's a very real challenge. Now, having said that, what I would tell a typical teenager who's struggling with social skills is start small. You don't have to socialize with everybody and their uncle. That's not necessary, right? So you can always choose people who make you feel safe and start by hanging out with them. Even if it means just one other person, start small. And then you can expand your circle by taking your safe buddy along into unfamiliar social situations. See how it goes. It can be touch and go initially, but you will always know that you have each other, regardless of how things turn out in that social situation. If you have one other person to fall back on, you will feel relatively safer and more regulated to carry on in that social setting. Does that seem doable? Does that sound like something that's practical and people might be able to do?
Yeah, it seems quite reasonable. A solution, or not even a solution, just a stepping stone to.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I would reiterate that it's not necessary to socialize with everybody, because that puts a lot of pressure, isn't it? When you assume or imagine that you're supposed to socialize with everybody who's out there, that can put so much of pressure on you. So take that away and tell yourself that, no, I don't need to have this humongous social circle comprised of thousands of people. Even if I have one or two other people who make me feel completely safe, that is a good start.
Of course. Thank you for that answer. It was very insightful. You gave a lot of good points. And I wanted to add that having that one safe buddy can actually um, can actually have a similar effect, like, but in reverse. So where the safe buddy takes you into new social situations.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. But again, it depends on how your body is wired, right? If
Yeah.
that's an anxious person as well, then your social circle might be limited for some time, and that's okay. I
Mm.
think we need to help teenagers recognize the fact that even having one good friend is great.
Of course. Now, this question came from both teenagers and parents. Both
Mhm,
have very different takes on it, as I'm sure you can imagine.
mhm.
Um, so it was about boundaries and space. So now you can see why they had different takes on it, can't you?
Yes.
So teenagers, according to teenagers, it seems like um, their parents are engaged in every single aspect of their life, and their parents want them to be fully engaged at all times, and the parents say that it seems like the teenagers find it difficult the parents say that they find it difficult to engage with their teenager. So
Mm.
is it fair for a teenager to be forced to engage when they would just rather be left alone?
Mm. And I think this is a very good question and a burning question right now.
Mm.
So my recommendation to parents is if you want to have this amazing relationship with your teen, then you need to start when they are much younger, right? Catch them young. It really works here. So if you're used to having conversations and it's a two-way street from the time your child is 1, 2, 3 years old, from the time they start verbalizing and talking,
Mm.
then you're not going to have this challenge at all because they're going to talk to you well into their teens. However, if you've been too busy and you've been on your gadgets or you've been busy attending to your other pursuits and work while they were younger, and now that they are in their teens, you suddenly expect them to turn around and have these deep, meaningful conversations with you. Is that even a reasonable expectation? What do
Mm.
you think, Aryan?
I think it's a case of you get out what you put in, or you reap.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Now, having said that, even parents who have the most amazing relationships do find that their teens slowly begin to pull away as they grow older and they start preferring to spend larger amounts of time with their peer group. And let me tell you, this is good, this is healthy, this is a normal developmental milestone socially and psychologically. And as parents, I think we should encourage this. Just like you watch for these milestones as your child grows from toddlerhood to childhood. Is my child walking and talking on time? Did my child crawl? Did my child start to eat on his own? Right? Those are physical milestones we watch for in their younger years. This is an important milestone as they grow up. Once they enter their teens, children should learn to differentiate or separate from their parents, move a little away, put some distance between themselves and their parents, because that's when they start identifying themselves as individuals. And that's really important as part of their own identity formation. And when they get to that space, it becomes so important for them to belong to a niche, a clique of their own peers who are, similar in age and interests, and they want to be included and welcomed. And that is possible only if, as parents, we are allowing them to do that. If we're able to open ourselves up to the possibility that they're not going to want to be around us for so long, not as much as they needed us earlier. They now want to be around people of their own age. So
Hmm.
please encourage that, be open to it, be prepared for it, expect and anticipate it. And when they start to spend more time with their friends, don't feel hurt. Don't go into this whole martyr mode of, oh, I've done so much for you and now you don't need me anymore, which seems to be a very typical thing that happens to parents of teenagers.
Hmm.
Instead, I would suggest that parents start filling up that excess time that shows up as their children grow up into their own pursuits. Do stuff that you've always dreamed of doing, but you didn't have the time for. Follow your heart, get into new hobbies, hang out with your own friends, create a social circle, do things that nourish your soul, and give your children the space that they need to grow up. Right? This is an important part of growing up. So allow them to grow. Don't clip their wings by insisting that they should be around you and talk to you. Right? Give them that space. It's so important.
And anyways, it's natural for a teenager or just any person in general to want to have some time to themselves. Is it?
Yes, absolutely. The me time is so critical. Even for parents, it's important. And somewhere, I think in our culture, especially, parents start defining themselves by their children, right? It's almost like their identities are an extension of their children. Now is the time to separate, because this
Mm,
psychological differentiation, it's so important. Only then can children see themselves as separate individuals with an identity of their own, right?
mm,
And then we complain that they're not independent and that they don't take care of themselves.
yeah,
Duh, right?
yeah. Tell me about it. And so essentially what you're saying is by letting go, it can help bring you closer.
Absolutely. It nurtures trust. And this is all about freedom based on trust. And I would recommend that you be open to conversation and available to them on their terms at their pace. Because teenagers do want to talk. They do want to engage with you as parents because they seek you out for advice in situations where they feel lost. And if you have a warm and nurturing relationship with them, where you keep that conversational door open, there's no pressure, they don't have to talk to you, but then you communicate that, hey, I'm here for you whenever you need me. It's like you're keeping that whole communication ball rolling.
Mhm. So now, now we're moving on to social anxiety, which is what I introduced at the beginning. So
Mhm.
what is social anxiety? What are the typical symptoms? And is it just generalized anxiety, but in a social context? Would you mind elaborating on this?
So that's a very good question. Social anxiety is a, a medical condition and it needs a diagnosis, right?
Mm,
And it's not the same as shyness that you were talking about in the beginning.
yeah.
Now, typically, social anxiety is a persistent and pervasive state of intense fear in social situations, of being watched, of being judged, and sometimes also this, debilitating fear of offending someone, which makes people shut down completely. They want to withdraw, they don't want to engage. It can actually make them dysfunctional depending on where on the spectrum of anxiety they are. So
Mm.
it can be a really crippling condition if it's not diagnosed and treated on time.
And I'm assuming that for some it can seem, you know, it can be like quite a harrowing experience to want so badly to, have a help, like have a normal friend group or talk to people, but being unable to just put yourself out there. It can be quite a harrowing experience, almost like you're
Indeed.
on the outside, you know, of you're an outsider looking in, basically.
Absolutely. And I think you raised a very significant point there. And that's something that, I should have mentioned right at the beginning, that
Mm.
the one of the key elements that separates shyness from social anxiety is this desire to be part of a social group and have those social interactions. That's
Mm.
really a pressing need in them, but they're unable to do that. And that's why it becomes such a harrowing experience, because you want that, you want it so badly, and yet your anxiety stops you from going out there and putting yourself out in that situation, right? So it really can be so dysregulating, and it's so intense and so severe sometimes that people have physical symptoms like racing heart and nausea and dizziness. I've even seen people pass out from social anxiety.
Um, and the way that you've described it makes me think of phobias, except, phobias are obviously conditioned, whether through classical or operant conditioning, whereas social anxiety, I assume, is uh, not done through these means. Not.
So I would say there's a very thin line that separates the two, because they present identically, right? The bodily symptoms, the emotional and psychological response is pretty much the same. So social anxiety pretty much presents like social phobia, because it's so debilitating that you cannot function anymore. And that's what sets it apart from shyness, because shyness is more of a generalized personality characteristic.
Hmm.
And shy people can motivate themselves to function and be part of social situations, whereas social anxiety is so debilitating that that's just not possible without intervention.
So, how would you differentiate between regular teenage awkwardness and, shyness from full-blown social anxiety? And I know you talked about this, but would you mind elaborating a little bit more?
So going back to the example of your friend that you shared at the beginning, That is very typical and characteristic of social anxiety, right? Some of the signs which set it apart are A, there is this pressing need to belong, to actually go out there and socialize. And B, there is this debilitating fear which prevents you from doing that. So it's a lot of inner conflict and the nervous system is completely in an upheaval, which causes all these bodily symptoms and makes them completely dysfunctional. And that's how you separate or distinguish it from normal teenage awkwardness, because someone who's just socially awkward can still function and go about their business. But here, the activities of daily living are impaired. You're unable to actually function. You shut yourself down, go into a room and you isolate yourself. You don't want to engage with anybody. Your appetite is affected. Your sleep is disturbed. There are so many of these symptoms which set this apart. And those are your cues that, okay, there is something wrong here and this needs to be evaluated and medically treated.
So, to come to a more positive note on this, what are some coping mechanisms that teenagers who struggle with social anxiety can adopt? And what do parents and educators do to support them?
So again, this would depend upon the severity of the symptoms and of course, how long it's persisted. If it's extreme and so severe and intense that it's starting to affect functioning, then the first line of intervention would be to seek help. Reach out to a professional, and that's how parents and educators can help, by observing and flagging this off so that the person can get the necessary professional help in a timely manner. If it's on a mild or moderate area of the spectrum, in that case, perhaps teenagers can try some self-help methodologies. One is going back to what I had recommended right at the start. Try and find 1 or 2 safe people with whom you can really let your hair down and be yourself and hang out, and then maybe expose yourself to relatively unsafe situations, but while you're still with your safe buddies. So you have that cushioning, that little bit of comfort of falling back on them, knowing that you have an exit option, that if it gets overwhelming, you can always rely on your friends to help you get out of that situation. Second, while you're by yourself, that's another presenting feature of social anxiety. It's not just in social situations, but it has a lingering effect. Even when you're not in a social situation, you keep thinking and reminiscing and ruminating about it. It keeps churning in your mind. And that is what pulls you down even further. And in those moments, some breath work, meditation, or mindfulness can be really, really helpful to ground you, to kind of help you settle in and be in the present moment and remind yourself that, okay, I'm not really in that dangerous situation in this moment and I can relax. Otherwise, the dysregulation just continues 24/7. Whether or not you're in a social setting, you're still hyper anxious, right? So you can use these methodologies to feel better. And if nothing works, then the best thing to do is approach a professional.
So, first off, I wanted to thank you so much for being here. I knew this would be an amazing session, and it truly was. It was so informative. Thank you for everything that you said. It's so relevant, and I'm sure it can help so many people around us. Just, I can't begin to thank you enough. Thank you so much for being here.
Not at all. My pleasure. And I must tell you, Aryan, I have myself been a socially anxious person. So this is not just from textbooks, but from my own personal experience. I've shared some of these things because the mindfulness and the breath work, it really works. At first I was very skeptical about it and I was like, how is that going to help with social anxiety? But it does. And, I'm a living example. If I'm able to do this with you today, it's because of all the breath work and years of mindfulness that I've put into it. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. It's been fun talking to you. And if you have any further questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Well, first off, thank you so much for sharing such a personal story. And yeah, no further questions from this end.
Great then. It was lovely interacting with you and hope to catch you again sometime. Bye-bye.